New York Ranger playoff hockey is upon us, and we are welcoming Joey and Stevie from the Broadway Block Podcast to break down the matchup with the Caps, talk about the possible return of Filip Chytil, and also reminisce about some unforgettable playoff moments between the Rangers and the Caps.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1050 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick, joined here by my good friends, Stevie and Joey from the Broadway Block Podcast. And guys, it's great to have you back on the show. Obviously, it's always a pleasure talking some Ranger hockey and a special time of the year here right before the playoffs begin. And, you know, we knew we wanted to do this episode, but we wanted to wait and see who the Rangers were going to play. We know now it's the Capitals. And so I just want to ask you guys first thoughts on playing the Caps. You know, obviously there's a lot of history there. And how do you think the Rangers stack up against this team?
Well, I mean, listen, on paper, right, this should be a shoo-in, but it is that time of year, so you never know what's going to happen. I feel like we had just had Jim Cerny on from the Forever Blueshirts, and we were talking with him about, you know, is momentum real, and can you carry that over from the regular season? A lot of the players and the coaches and people inside the room kind of say no. But I disagree with that. I feel like, you know, Igor shutting the door right before the playoffs start is like such a huge sign for this team. And on the train ride, Joe and I were kind of thinking, like, do you rest him? Do you put in quick? It is the Senators. You know, do you let him kind of finish off on that OT win against the Islanders? And I think that at least proves a little bit of my point, is that, you know, you put him in to keep him hot. You know, it could have went either way, but I think Igor and the team should feel really good about the way that they closed out that regular season.
I have to agree with Steve that like I said, we had Jim Cerny on, and he said that momentum doesn't carry over. I think the momentum that Igor got from that win, and you got to look at the Capitals. They've been like grappling for a playoff spot for the last 3 or 4 weeks now. So for them too, they have momentum coming in. Spencer Carberry has really got the best of his guys going right now. And I think that matchup could go like any way, you know, depending on how Alex Ovechkin plays and their power play really works out for them. And same with us, you know, if we get going and our power play looks good and Igor stands on his head like he usually does. But you got to look at Igor the last 3 seasons. He's really been a man of consistency with 36 wins this season, 37 wins last season, 36 the year before. So it's pretty awesome to see. And now we just need the Rangers to prove it in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's nice to see Igor, you know, have those 2 big-time shutdown games at the end of the regular season there and closing things out with that shutout win over the Senators. And, you know, yeah, it's the Senators, but, you know, you're playing a team that's got nothing to lose, and they could obviously deal the Rangers a blow if they were to beat them in that last game, and Rangers were able to seal everything the last day for them of the regular season. So that's obviously great to see. And, yeah, Igor, I mean, you never know. You know, goalies can kind of be up and down, but he's not too high on my list of concerns, you know, for the Rangers. If there is anything that would make me a little bit nervous, Igor, you know, he went through his rough patch earlier this year, and that certainly seems like it's behind him. I did want to ask you guys, though, because we saw a really weird situation with how the Capitals clinched their playoff spot. You know, they're playing the Flyers, and the Flyers, to stay alive for the playoffs, they got to win in regulation. So they pull their goalie, Caps score an empty netter in a tie game with like 3 minutes left to ultimately, you know, clinch their spot in the playoffs. I mean, just a weird situation. Just want to get your guys' take on that. And, you know, were you watching the games those night and all those different clinching scenarios?
Yeah, if you watch with no audio like I had to at work, you kind of were like, what's going on, right? And the other thing that crossed my mind is, you know, I was tuning in to the Caps game, watching the broadcast, but I was also kind of checking the score on the Detroit game. And once they tied it up and went to overtime, got that point, part of me thought, you know, maybe 10%. We always talk about like Tortorella playing chess and not checkers. I mean, wouldn't it have just been funny if he was like, well, you know what? You just kicked us out of the playoffs, so why don't we do the same for you and give the Capitals a point? probably not how it went down, but it was just one of those. I mean, I can't remember that ever happening. Can you?
No, and it's one of those things that's just kind of, it is funny to think about that. Like, again, I don't think that he knew, because once Detroit went into overtime, the Flyers
Sure.
couldn't make it, so there was no point in them pulling their goalie. But there is that little party. I mean, we know he's no fan of Crosby and Malkin. What did he called them, those two whining stars over there all those years ago when he was coaching the Rangers. So it is kind of funny to think about. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Just kind of a bizarre situation. How are you guys feeling about Panarin heading into the playoffs? Because obviously he had this just unreal season, 120 points, and one of the best seasons we've ever seen from a Ranger player, period. But, obviously scuffled in the playoffs last year, and this is when the lights are the brightest. I feel good about him. I think he's in a good spot. And obviously that line's been firing on all cylinders all season. But just your thoughts on Panarin and where he's at and what you expect from him in the playoffs.
He's really been loose. I feel like he's ready to go. When Steve and I were at that last game, he really was trying to get that 50th goal. Everybody was rooting him on. They kept him on the power play for 1 and 2 and just tried to let it. Everyone was passing him the puck. So I just feel like he's more comfortable in Laviolette's system. He's not expected to be that workhorse. And an interesting point we were talking about on our show is that every year we've been saying that he needs to shoot more. And this year it seems like he's really shot more, and they've been good shots. They haven't just been like wide, crazy shots and everything. And, he's Mr. Assist. So he's just been lighting up both ways this year. So that's really been fun to see. And the only thing left he has to do is prove the haters wrong in the playoffs, which I think he's ready to do.
Yeah, one of the things too with Panarin, like you touch on the goals, Joe, but think about the timeliness of these goals. Like we're talking like game tying, game winning, shootout, overtime. Like the goals that he's scoring, yeah, they're just so meaningful. I think that's what gets lost in this MVP discussion. Everybody's really quick to bring up the points, but what he's doing in a Rangers uniform is unprecedented, and the only one who's ever done that is number 3 all time in scoring and assisting. So it's one of those years that you're definitely going to look back at and think we were the best team in the league that year. We were, we had one of the best guys that we've ever watched in a Rangers uniform. I'll definitely remember the 2024 season regardless of the outcome, but surely, like Joe alluded to, I mean, this is the last thing left to do. I think what's made Panarin so dynamic is that everyone always expects that shot or that pass rather. And now you don't know what to do, because if he's coming at you with the puck on a stick, he's looking one way, he's going to go the other. If he's looking past, he's going to shoot it without even looking. And it's just like, he's so dynamic that way that I feel like he can continue this. And he has been open and saying that, like, this is it. It's time to win the Stanley Cup. Like, this is, exactly what Joe said, time to silence all the haters.
Yeah, it's been awesome to see him shoot a little bit more this season, because I'm with you guys. For years, I was wishing that he would shoot a little bit more. And, he's such a selfless player, always wants to set up his buddy for an easy tip-in goal or whatever it might be. But I mean, Henrik Lundqvist not that long ago, he said that this guy has the most accurate shot of anybody I've ever seen. And you hear that and it's like, all right, this guy has to shoot the puck more. And we've seen that this year, and it's obviously been awesome. And 49 goals, I think, is what he ended up with. And I mean, just what an unbelievable season. Something else that's kind of been a topic of debate among Ranger fans, the President's Trophy. Some people think it's cursed, but when you look at the stats, for the whole, ever since it's been presented, I think now it's like 22% of President's Trophy winners win the cup, which is not a bad percentage at all. It hasn't produced a Stanley Cup winner in recent history, but I mean, just your thoughts on that. Because for me, I feel like it's something to be embraced. Top team in the league, best record, most points, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go get this thing. But I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that as well.
I think it's awesome. I love it. Like it makes the last part of the season for me, these last couple of weeks, where like it's almost meaningless hockey because we qualified for the playoffs. But for me, I was like, I want this President's Trophy. I just kept telling everybody. And to your point, the 22%, there's only been 8 teams that have won the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup. And also in most, like you said, it hasn't been recent. I think it was the Chicago Blackhawks most recently. So it hasn't been done, but one of those 8 teams was the New York Rangers in 93, 94. So I'm feeling good about it. And like Steve and I touched on before, I feel good. Like the momentum has to carry off into the playoffs.
Oh, this is a great opportunity to beat home a point that we talk about on our show to a new audience. It's 2024. There's no thing as a curse, no such thing, right? It doesn't exist. And you can touch the trophy, right? You could throw it into the crowd for all you want. It does not matter. What matters is that we have home ice advantage throughout the duration of the playoffs, which deserves to be celebrated. And our regular season accomplishments are things that we need to take pride in and need to, celebrate when they come around, because not too long ago we were rebuilding the franchise, and it's like, wow, what a milestone marker to, in 5 years time, completely flip that narrative from first overall pick to first overall team.
Yeah, amen. I totally agree with that, and it's been amazing. It's an accomplishment that doesn't get celebrated probably enough when you're the top team out of 32. And look, obviously, it pales in comparison to whichever team wins the Stanley Cup. But you know what? Hopefully, the Rangers can do both this year, and add a couple trophies to the case there. So we're gonna keep everything rolling in just a second here. We're gonna talk about some lineup decisions that the Rangers are gonna have to make. Also, possibly Filip Chytil getting back into the lineup. We'll see. We're going to do that in just a second. But first, definitely want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide for your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. All right, so we'll go ahead and keep everything rolling here. And guys, I know I'm not the only Ranger fan that I almost lost my mind when I saw that Filip Chytil was back at practice and sounding like he's a full participant and everything. And who knows, might get in there for the playoffs. They haven't, said that he's going to. They haven't said that he's not going to. But I mean, just your reaction upon finding out that this is even a possibility and that this guy is actually back at Ranger practice.
Well, finding out that he's back is obviously great. For first part, he started the season as our second line center. So anytime you're getting your second line center back, it's a good day. Also, it adds us kind of a safety cushion that if something happens to one of these other guys, maybe he has to come back a little quicker, into the playoffs, but maybe that's a safety net that we didn't know we had. Also, he just adds another part of playoff experience from previous years past that I feel like he's an electric goal scorer. So I feel like he can make any line better when he's playing Filip Chytil hockey. So it'd be great to have him back in the lineup. The only problem is he ready to just play at such a high level in the playoffs right away? That scares me a little bit, but hopefully he can just transition right away. We've seen him come back from injury time in and time again. So it'd be great to see him get back in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to Joe's point, anytime you're getting a player of that magnitude, I mean, I've watched a lot of people online kind of dismiss, the Rangers are getting a third liner back. It's not going to be the difference maker. But I think this team is so deep that even if I only viewed him as a third line player, I do think that would still make a difference. I mean, we just talked about it. We're the best team in the league and we're going to get deeper. So, I mean, any team that's looking on should be pretty scared. And I mean, Chytil is, again, to Joe's point, he's dynamic. I mean, he's definitely a game changer when he's playing his best hockey. We've seen him produce some huge goals for us, especially in the playoffs. And just the way he can kind of weaponize that speed on, again, a team that's already very fast and able to do that. I think the one thing with Chytil that we've seen him struggle, he entered the league as, I think, one of the youngest players the youngest Ranger, if I'm not mistaken, to have played as many games as he has. And it's one of those things where it's was it the coach? Was it this awful development that we always kind of talk about when we talk about prospects for the Rangers? But another thing is that center is a very difficult position, and he's only ever had some, maybe let's say underqualified line mates. He definitely didn't have like 2024 Lafreniere on his wing. And they were still able to find a lot of chemistry with the kid line. So my thing is, if Chytil came back, who's to say he even plays third line center? I mean, he could be like the top line right wing right now with somebody like Kreider and Mika. And we've already, ran that experiment. But again, I think it's a different weapon when you're talking about Panarin, Trocheck, Laf really kind of is the top line. So now it's not really the top line he's taking on. He's going to be like the second line winger to Kreider and Mika. And the jury's out, I think, still a little bit on somebody like Roslovic and Wenberg and where exactly they fit in. I think they've been complementary players, but I don't think that they've been those catalysts, fit right in the way that like a Frank Vetrano had, endeared himself to fans the way he did because he fit right in immediately and he was overproducing what he probably should have. So getting Chytil back, I think, has the chance to create waves in a team that's already surging in the right direction. And I mean, what a time. I mean, it feels kind of odd because we all kind of talk about Vegas and the way that Mark Stone just kind of like and then comes back for the start of the playoffs. And I don't think that Chytil's doing that, but I think that we've somehow landed on a really unique time frame where it could time out where he joins the playoffs. It's still not determined whether or not he's going to play game one for us. But it is a card that you now have the same way we have someone like Rempe to infuse into the lineup, who's probably going to be a healthy scratch a few times. It will really, I think, allow us to pick those matchups accordingly and play whatever line based on whatever we need to do at that time.
It's funny you mentioned, the whole situation with Mark Stone, and I think this is like 3 straight years where he gets injured, quote unquote, before the deadline. And then somehow, it just always seems to work out that he's ready to go for game one of the first playoff series. It's funny how that happens. The thing, like, I don't think that's what's going on here with the Rangers and Chytil, but even if it is, like, I don't really begrudge teams for doing that. It's the NHL's own fault for having, such a ridiculous loophole that, teams can get away with this every single season. And if you're not, and the salary cap is tight as it is, so if you're not at least looking into that option, you're probably doing a disservice to, yourself and your team. But, if Chytil does go back in there, and again, it's a big if, we don't know for sure one way or the other, but who do you think like comes out of the lineup? Because at that point, you've basically got 14 forwards for 12 spots. I mean, I would think it would probably be Brodzinski and Rempe that would sit, but I mean, does that sound about right to you guys? Or would you try to get Rempe in there and maybe Roslovic sits? I mean, just any thoughts on how the lineup could look if Chytil does go back in there?
Well, I think it just kind of goes towards the matchups and kind of how the Capitals are playing, which, like you touched on, is that, like, let's say a Tom Wilson incident happens, obviously you're going to get Rempe out there and kind of look at like that Devils game matchup where you get that first line, where you get a tougher matchup with like Trouba, Keandre out there, Barkley, and everybody fighting a little bit more. Or, you piece him in if you feel like you need somebody speedy and, more shooting for the games. So I kind of feel like it's just that, like Steve touched on, that it's really just cards that Laviolette can play in. And for him, he's been doing it all year. So for me, it's like, great. It's just another card that Laviolette gets to use in his deck that he knows what he's doing. Because you got to look at the matchup there between Spencer Carberry and Peter Laviolette. Like, it's like, yeah, Spencer Carberry's had a great year. He's been on teams that have been to the playoffs before as an assistant coach, but he's never run the show. So, the playoff hockey is a different season. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup. And having Filip Chytil will just be another card that I think will be per matchup if he gets to use him.
It's hard right now with the way that the fourth line has shown itself in some games. Consistency is definitely the issue, but there were games where the fourth line was our best line. And I believe Brodzinski is more of a key role to that than somebody like a Goodrow. I mean, it is also hard to deny that we have one of the best penalty kills in the league. And, that Goodrow absolutely plays a part in that. And the same can be said about Jimmy Vesey. So it's not just as simple as like scratch a fourth liner and the team should be better. And then the other thing is Chytil played 10 games with us this year. And, we said it about coming into the playoffs, but there's something to be said about disturbing the chemistry that kind of already exists. And we've seen Roslovic get scratched, and Wenberg's a guy that shows himself a little bit more on the defensive end, and I could see one of the newer guys being maybe less affected by, this guy was here before you got here type of thing. And this was the spot that you were covering essentially. I don't think that that's necessarily cut and dry either. It's going to be a hard conversation, but having a deep team and having a healthy team and having to make these decisions in the playoffs is a good problem to have when you consider, the alternative, which is the Black Aces and playing a fourth and third line completely comprised out of AHL players, which you can make the argument is what Rempe and Brodzinski are, but having had all this NHL seasoning really did, I think, them some good. And yeah, it's a good problem to have, man.
Even on the defensive end, we have
Yes.
like lots of depth there with, look at Zac Jones and Ruhwedel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually going to ask you guys about that. So we might as well just jump into that right now. I mean, obviously, Zac Jones was playing some great hockey. Rangers were down a handful of defensemen. I believe at one time, Gustafsson, Lindgren, and Trouba were all out with an injury. It overlapped very briefly, all three of them. But, Jones is out there, and he's looking good, and puck-moving defenseman, and just playing with a lot of confidence. And I know there's some people that want him to play, and it does seem kind of unfair that he's out of the lineup now, but what's your guys' take on that? Like, are you some of the Ranger fans that think like, oh my God, this guy has to be in over Gustafsson, or is it more kind of like, you're cool with Gustafsson, or just any thoughts you have on that whole situation there?
I think Gustafsson comes with the NHL experience, that Laviolette doesn't have to worry so much about Zac Jones. Obviously, Zac Jones has shown that he can be a productive NHL defenseman, but Erik Gustafsson comes with that seasoned veteran experience that I think just ties in with Laviolette for what he wants right now. And I just see that, yeah, you get some offensive production out of Zac Jones, but I feel like, when you look at the more seasoned player, I feel like Gustafsson gives you a little bit more offensive edge. Yeah, we've seen him get beat a little bit, but we've also seen him have strong defensive plays where Zac Jones, maybe, yeah, he's buzzing right now, but could you rely on him all season? I don't know. Maybe we'll see next season, but I just feel like for me right now, I would prefer Gustafsson in.
Yeah, and we actually touched on it when you joined us on our show, John, about just how many defensemen are ahead in the depth chart over a guy like Jones, and it's basically every defenseman. And we kind of were when you were talking with us about Miller and Schneider, but you can extend that conversation to Jones, being that when he was drafted and all the opportunities that have presented themselves from draft day to now, there's always been, let's say, 6, like if we're honest, defensemen above him, and we've seen that materialize into people like Niels Lundqvist, asking for a trade, realizing the lack of opportunity ahead of them. And, the trade for Joey Keane was a prospect that didn't materialize too much, but it was basically, you're like 9th or 10th on the depth chart. There's no way you're ever going to see time, and you have to end up getting rid of those guys. I think if you asked me this question before the season started, before we saw this version of Zac Jones, that I would have said we need to do our best to not make him look foolish so that we can still get something for him and probably leverage a piece using him as a trade chip. I think now he's proved that he has an NHL future. Whether or not that is with the Rangers, we'll see. And I think that as time goes on, we could use some contracts like his, and it would be maybe foolish to get rid of him. But how long can you really kind of, just say, yes, sir, and kind of just wait your turn in line? I'm happy with him as a depth option. And, it is nice to know, having had some of these games, and you touched on it perfectly, that time was so crucial. The team was playing really, really well and really couldn't afford to drop this momentum. And he stepped in and did a great job. So, there's something to be said for that. I think that the organization now and the fans know a lot more of what they have in a guy like Zac Jones.
Absolutely. I wonder if maybe, he's the number 6 defenseman on opening night next year. It might finally be his turn because, Gustafsson, and I like him. I think overall he's done a nice job this season, but a lot of times, these 1-year free agent pickups, it's just that, they're here for 1 year and then they're on their way. And I mean, Gustafsson has played for about every NHL team that there is. I mean, he's been on about 10 different teams. So we'll see how it goes. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, but obviously there's bigger fish to fry in the meantime here. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We're all going to talk about some of our favorite moments from Rangers versus Caps over the years, because obviously there's quite the history there. Going to also, of course, make some predictions for the series. First, though, we definitely want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime, and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game, Monopoly Go, lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests in tournaments to get rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, so we'll keep everything rolling here. And, guys, obviously a lot of history here between these two teams, a bunch of meetings in the playoffs. And, the last 3 times they've met each other in the playoffs, it's gone 7 games. But is there a moment from the playoffs or really any moment in this rivalry that really stands out for you guys as your favorite? And we're going to make the step on Game 7 overtime winner. That one's ineligible because that's a legendary moment. That's just not even fair. So it's got to be something other than that.
I really like in the 2012 series that obviously went 7 in the second round. For me, I was a lot younger then, so it was easier to stay up later. But I like that one that went to, I think it was 3 overtimes, and then Marian Gaborik ended up winning it. For me, that was epic because I committed and I stayed up all night for that, like to watch that. So that was fun to see. And it was like, we needed that win against the Caps because they had just won Game 2. So everybody was on edge. So you were like, it's a must win for the Rangers.
Yeah, I stayed up that night too. And obviously I was a lot younger then. It was a lot easier to pull that off.
A lot easier.
when Gaborik won though, like I'd like to say I went crazy and like yelling. It was just kind of like, I just kind of like put my arms up on the couch. And
I was like,
okay,
finally. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Stevie, man, what do you got for your
if that one's off limits and Joe just took mine, I had to look up the date. But I think my knee-jerk reaction moment, not in playoffs, when we talk about the Capitals, is that Marek Malik through the leg shootout goal. I remember being, just had to date myself just to figure it out. But apparently I was 11 years old. And I mean, I still remember that to that day. And against Olaf Kolzig, who's no slouch, right? And there's those classic kind of Capitals uniforms that I wish they would bring back and stick with.
I haven't done a reverse retro of those.
It would slap for sure, like a little black one. But going into the playoffs, I mean, so many memories with so many series and just the battles between like Henrik Lundqvist and Braden Holtby. I think Holtby and Ovechkin to me represent the first time that we started to make the enemy a little bit like evil and start to kind of like cringe when you would see guys like Crosby and guys like Ovechkin, because they always just seem to have our numbers. And those, that's what makes playoffs for sure, is like creating those memories and creating those actual rivalries. Because people talk about like the Devils are our rival. It's like that series wasn't enough, and now look at them. You know what I mean? This is the definition of a rivalry that spanned decades and will maybe have one last hurrah at it. I hate to say it like that. I do feel like, that organization's kind of time to be relevant is starting to slip. But I mean, you said it best on our show, man. Be careful what you wish for. And this is one of those matchups just kind of turn ugly real quick. Yeah, I hope we can make plenty more.
Yeah, I mean, Ovechkin is still Ovechkin. His numbers are slightly down, but you look at his numbers and it's like, we did a crossover with Locked On Caps earlier today, and I said to him, like, 90% of the players in this league would sign up for the numbers that Ovechkin's putting up this year, and yet it's one of his weakest seasons ever. So, I mean, that's how you're dealing with a legend. And that shootout game all those years ago, I'm pretty sure Lundqvist was a rookie and so was Ovechkin, or at the very least, like second year maybe for one or the other. But I mean, man, that is a long time ago and just wild to think about. But if I can throw one out, obviously the step on Game 7 overtime winner is ineligible. So I'll go back the game before that, Game 6. it's kind of a forgotten game, but the Rangers were up 4-1. They scored a goal early in the third period. Dan Boyle, of all people, I think his only season with the Rangers. And you think you're in control, and then, the Caps score with about 12 minutes left. They score with 9 minutes left. And it's like, man, we're up against it now. Like we really got to scratch and claw to hang on to this one. And the Rangers were somehow able to run out the clock despite being under crazy pressure down the stretch of that game. And I remember I watched that game with my whole family. Like my parents were there. My sister was there. We're all Ranger fans. And when it ended, I went to the refrigerator, grabbed 4, what we'll call them adult sodas, and just brought them out to everybody. And like, okay, let's all just try to calm down from all that insanity. And then oh my God, Game 7 is like 2 nights from now. We're gonna have to go through this all over again. So it's definitely some fun times watching these two teams.
I know we briefly spoke about our Game 7 experiences, but I was my now wife was my girlfriend's house, and her dad got up like 4 a.m. to go to work, and basically from the nights before was like, all right, we're not gonna stay up all night screaming tonight, right, guys? And I was like, yeah, I'll try my best. And when the goal happened, I was speechless, but literally holding back like all of that excitement, and just my face the whole time was just like jaw dropped. And yeah, I'll definitely never forget that game for sure.
It's definitely hard to hold it in spots like that, but I'll give you props for doing that. It sounds like you came through big there. So yeah, I mean, I figure, we can wrap up with a couple more questions here. Do you guys have like a dark horse for the Rangers in this series? Like somebody that, I mean, we obviously know this team, inside and out. We know all the players and watch them on a daily basis, or, whenever they play. But somebody, maybe a bottom 6 forward or a defenseman, somebody that's going to step up and do something big for the Rangers in this series?
For me, it's not a bottom 6 player. For me, I don't always wear a jersey when I do our podcast, but for Locked On Rangers today, I was like, I feel like wearing a jersey. And I was like, who's going to come up big this playoff series? Chris Kreider.
There it is.
Is going to come up big. I think he's going to have some big power play goals. And I think the only thing for me the Rangers have lacked on a little bit all season has been 5-on-5 goals. We've even seen, like, even in the 4-0 win against Ottawa, I'm like, oh, we got a shorty, we got 2 power play goals, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we get 1 5-on-5. So I think Chris Kreider is going to come up big in front of the net for the power play, but I also think he's going to give some big fast break opportunities for the Rangers and really set some people up. So I think he's going to be a crucial player for us and going to come up big time.
Along the same lines, man, Mika Zibanejad is being dragged through the mud anywhere you go online, and people are so quick to jump on the bandwagon when he is white hot. And I feel like a Hattie is coming for sure, and I feel like driving the boat on that line, and maybe it takes a guy like Chytil coming into establishing a little bit of a target for him to pass to. People talk about it all the time and stripping the monkey off their back. Once he scores one, man, they come in bunches, and whether that just be a nifty feed to somebody to kind of start that, I think the playoffs represent a perfect wiping of the slate. And, nobody cares about what happened all regular season. Sure, we want Bread to roll that momentum into it, and tack on 121 points the minute the puck drops. But I feel like Mika is one of those guys that people are going to forget about, because you go down the list with this team, right? You go Adam Fox, Igor Shesterkin, Artemi Panarin. We've already mentioned some of the other guys that are supplementary guys, but you can kind of forget that your number one center used to be one of the best, if not at times the best player on this team. And as long as we get Mika May, I don't think anybody's going to remember Mika March.
Very, very good point. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to go with the defense pairing, the newfound defense pairing of Gustafsson and Trouba. With Trouba, he came back. I don't think he played very well when he came back from the injury. He was trying to get it going a little bit. They put him and Miller back together. I've talked about this on my show. There's times where that's been a very effective pairing for the Rangers. Miller and Trouba together just hasn't clicked. At times this season, maybe a little bit. At times it hasn't at all. And we saw Miller and Schneider play very well together. I'm happy they went back to that. I feel like at times you can almost get a little too comfortable with your line mates, a little too comfortable with your defense partner, and maybe playing with somebody new just kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit. I feel like Trouba has looked a little better these last 2 games, and it's Rangers Caps, man. This gets nasty, and these players go after each other, and it's hard hitting, and that to me sounds like a kind of an environment where Jacob Trouba is going to thrive. So, he's the captain, he's always accountable, and I think we're going to see him play, some of the better hockey that he's played so far this season.
Well, this team is an absolute problem. Sorry, go ahead.
I just was saying, I like that take. Like, you're definitely going to see some big true hits come through.
I think so. Yeah.
If this team is firing on all cylinders, man, there's every team in the league should be worried. And to my point, you mentioned a guy like Trouba. You can almost forget that you have one of the most elite separate body from puck players in the league on your team, as not your first 10 answers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I figure we can call it there. Guys, it's a ton of fun. We've talked about this before, that the time always flies by when we're chilling here talking some hockey. But where can everybody find your podcast, and where can they find you guys on social media?
Well, Broadway Block on Twitter and Instagram. Podcast available wherever you stream your media: Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And like you said, man, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, John. Always a pleasure. And if we go deep in the playoffs, hopefully a Stanley Cup preview matchup, maybe episode, Locked On Rangers or Broadway Block, either or.
I'm up for it, man. The deeper they go, the more episodes we can do together. So here's to an awesome playoff run, and let's just hope it starts with a big win on Sunday.
Cheers, brother. Thank you.
All right. And Ranger fans, we will see you guys next time.